He's in the top. He's in the top. He's up there. Absolutely, 100%. He's in there. Surely he's in there.
Yeah.
Jack, I don't know if you saw it. There's a wonderful documentary on Netflix about Jack Johnson and his.
I saw that.
Oh man, that thing, man.
I saw that.
That thing, bruh. That dude, man. That dude was such a bad dude. I mean, you look at him because this was the movie, the lot of when he came along in the turn of the last century, they had movie cameras. They had cameras, actual movie cameras. So there's a lot of film of him.
Right.
And one of the things that struck me was that he was standing somewhere where he was training, and you looked at him. He had his shirt off and everything. He looked like a guy who plays middle linebacker for the New York Giants yesterday. So you look at him and see how big and developed is. You going, how does anybody get that kind of physique in 1902? He looked like a guy straight out the NFL yesterday, man. That's the thing that struck me. I don't know if you noticed that, Greg.
So he had worked out a deal. They did stuff like that back then. They worked out a deal.
The fights were.
What?
Some were bare knuckles.
Well, not only that,
real damage.
Remember that, Greg, too. Remember when he started out they had these, because fighting was illegal then, and they would have these places where they would go in and turn off the light, and it would be last man standing.
Oh, my God.
And he was like, he was knuckling everybody down. He knuckled everybody down.
Yep.
That's how then he went around and started stalking the white guy who was the actual champion. Yeah. And when you watch that Netflix thing, thing, you know what? I like what Stanley Couch.
Muhammad Ali talked about Jack Johnson in a very special way because that's who he looked up to.
Well, I'm going to say this about the thing that struck me about that documentary. Stanley Couch, who is a reporter, a writer. And Stanley Couch got on in that thing and he said, yeah, Jack Johnson, he's one of them. And he looked at the camera, he said, if he wasn't a real person, they would invent him. And I said, wow. That's how bad this dude was, man. They put him in prison,
Stanley.
and they had letters from the prison guards complaining that Jack Johnson wouldn't go in his cell. He was in prison and said, I ain't going in my, I go in my cell when I feel like it. They had nothing for him. I'm just saying, Brother Leroy.
They did that movie about him.
You got to watch that, man. Jack.
The Great White Hope,
Jack Johnson, they showed Jack
And that famous
Johnson.
line was, they asked the white woman, why? Why him?
Oh, and he had fast cars and walk around with tons of cash in his pocket. He's a black guy. That's back when you had when I was telling you they had cars, they didn't have no license plates. They had no rules for the cars. So he had all these fast cars.
Also like whorehouses. He spent a lot of time in whorehouses. So he was quite a guy.
Hey, look, he was a Renaissance man. Renaissance man.
One time he was driving and he got a speeding ticket. He told the guy that wrote the ticket, he said, listen, well, you might as well write another ticket because when I come back through, I'm going to be speeding again. So you might as well just give me two tickets.
You saw it. Oh, he did that. And he did that. He was he was a bad, like I said, Stanley Couch said,
bad man.
If he wasn't a real person, they would have invented him. That's how bad he was.
Yeah, he had a deal. He had a deal with a fighter. They did that back then. They made deals. And the guy went over he did something he wasn't supposed to do. He tried to go at Jack hard. Jack said, oh, you want to play like that? Hit the dude.
Wow.
All the guy's teeth came out on his gloves. And you can see him. You can see him wiping the guy's teeth off his gloves. Yeah, he was a bad man. Yeah, Jack Johnson was a bad man. True definition of bad.
I saw that, and the guy was supposed to have a rig fight, and the guy tried to knock Jack out. Jack said, what? He hit him so hard, knocked him off his feet, and had all his teeth in the glove. That was on film.
Yeah.
That was on film. You gotta see that, man. You gotta see that.
Doug, Mr. Cruz told me a story about, he used to play golf with Joe Louis. He had that picture with Joe Louis, and he played golf. But he said it was common practice at some of the clubs that, heavyweight champions would, not only heavyweight, but the champions would come to the clubs, to watch the show. But they could be challenged. And he talks about the fact that he was there twice. One night, a guy came in and challenged Joe Louis. At the time, he was dating Lena Horne. Lena Horne and Joe Louis.
Hey, Greg, listen, we gotta wrap it up. But since
Joe stood up, took it seriously. Big boy from down south took his coat off and proceeded to beat him up. More than what he would normally beat somebody up. But they say, well, Joe, why would you beat him up that bad? He said, because he challenged me while my woman was here.
Hey, Greg, we got to wrap it up. But now that the king is here, brother Leroy, who's a Knicks fan. So we got that's the last question. And, of course, we got the boxer here, and they're both basketball aficionados. So I just want you to, because they weren't in the room, Greg, can you just explain to them one more time what happened when we played on the same team with a guy who was leading the nation in rebound? Can you just tell them what I did to this guy in practice? Could you just say that? Because they don't believe this.
Doug, you were supposed to have been arrested. That's the truth. After that, you were supposed to be arrested. But when you dunked on him, the joke is that the brother hollered, no.
The leading.
And what you said.
He was the leading.
Yes.
He was the leading rebounder in the country.
In the nation.
In the nation.
Yeah.
And we were in practice, and he was trying to mess with Brother Leroy's home ski, Dougie Fresh.
Calling you in 5 minutes.
And he saw Brother Leroy's homeboy down there, Dougie Fresh from Lenox Avenue, and this guy's 6'9", and I dunked on him so hard that I had a big boil came on my hand with all the blood in it, because you know what? I ain't like that guy. I ain't like him that much. I'm talking about on the court. He was a nice man off the court. I just thank you, Greg, for letting Brother Leroy and Rick and putting them in their proper perspective so that they'll have the proper amount of reverence when they're talking to your homie, man. I'm just saying. They say, hey, Greg, I'm saying they should have had tape. They should have videotape. I don't think videotape was even invented back then, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, videotape might not have even been invented. That's how long ago that was. But you're the only living person alive that I can remember. I can remind them of that story, because that's one of those true stories, man. So, Greg Johnson.
But D, I think that story is number 2. The number 1 story is the story we talked about maybe a couple of weeks ago.
Hey, Greg, don't divulge that. Don't divulge that, what I did to the NBA guy. You got to come back and do that.
Okay, I'll come back.
That's for the
tell
follow-up.
That story. All right.
That's follow-up, baby. All right, man. We'll see you later, man. Thank you so much, Greg.
All right, man.
That was my college teammate, Mr. Greg Johnson, who also spent many years in the what's that? No, not the NCAA.
No, NAACP. Oh,
thank you, Greg. Sorry.
Jesus.
Yes, sorry. That was the NAACP. He spent many years there, so I wanted to get him to come on to talk a little bit about the idea that, and Brother Lee, this is going to lead up to Brother Leroy's show. Just the idea that I was watching something on TV last night, and I said, "Wow, this is my." I had my criminal hat on, my Dannemora hat, and I seen the guy get up there and said, "I went across town and I executed 7 people in broad daylight, and everybody saw it. And now I'm on radio letting y'all know that I wasn't trying to start no war. I wasn't trying to start no trouble." And I said to myself, with my criminal hat on, going, "That's some bullshit right there. That doesn't make any sense. I go and I kill 7 people. Then I come back and said, I did it because I didn't want to start no trouble. No, when you do that, that starts trouble. I just, I'm just.
It's in broad daylight. deceive people, and a person will be wandering around. Wait a minute, do I understand that? And the thing is, they rule by deception and deceit, and they do it right in front of you. I was talking to Dick Gregory, and I said, Dick Gregory, I said, man, it don't make sense. He said, don't try to make it make sense.
Right.
He said, if it don't make sense, it don't make sense.
Well, you reminded me of my famous Sherlock Holmes saying, when him and Watson was at a murder, and Watson came with this esoteric motive for the murder, and Sherlock Holmes said, with the person sitting there with a knife sticking out of his chest, he said, Watson, when it's obvious, why look beyond the obvious? Obama said, this is what Obama said, when you divide the people, when you need to bring everybody together, you're not going to be able to do it. And he's not going to be able to do it because everybody knows he's a liar. And everybody knows that the people who are acting like he's not a clown. If you're a clown, everybody's going to know you're a clown. So all of a sudden, so you can excuse him, but the people who are all surrounding him, who are mostly white guys, who are saying, hey, that was a great thing that he did.
Right.
They're talking crazy talk. They're talking, as we used to say in prison, they talking murder one.
That's what we're going to be dealing
Yeah, in prison we used to say that. We go we hear people talking tough, like the white guys. We go, oh, he talking that murder one time. Nobody wants to be charged with murder one. No one on living on earth ever wants to be charged with murder in the first degree. Murder in the first degree. No one wants that. No one. And you hear them on TV. That's the prison lingo. They're in there talking murder one talk, like they killers and gangsters. Are you kidding me? They're not. They're not. Because if they were, we wouldn't be having none of these kind of issues because, the killers know how to shut people up, man.
Killers?
They know how to shut people up, man. You see the killers in the NBA. I'm talking about the killers in the NBA when LeBron and them come to town. People don't be saying, we're going to kill them. We're going to bust them. They be quiet. You can hear a rat piss on cotton when the dudes come in. You see what I'm saying? You see my point that I'm making when the real
bad guys.
There's a guy named Hank who used to live on Lenox Avenue who supposedly had knocked out a horse. He's a big muscle-bound dude. And he
Wait a minute. Who's supposed to have done what?
Knocked out a horse.
He did.
Okay, so you know him. You know him. Okay, so you know him. You know who I'm talking about.
He knocked the horse.
You know who I'm talking about.
I think it was on 125th Street
Okay.
or 35th Street.
So here's what he always says. Here's what Hank always says, because I know him from, working out and everything. So Hank always would say to me, Doug, when bad men meet, they call me boss. When bad men meet, they call me boss. When bad men meet, they're not calling Trump boss. They're not doing it. You see what I'm saying? They're not doing it. So that's when when the bad men get together in Chicago in February, when they see LeBron, you know what they're going to be calling him, right? Boss. They're going to be calling him boss because he's got the body of work. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, Hank, my brother told me about him.
Man, I know him. We got to get him to come in here. I know him.
He's a living legend.
I know him.
Because it was a mounted police horse.
He told me that. We was standing there in front of your bakery on. We stand there one day and he told me that. I said, yeah. He said, they said, He said, I'm the one they said that about. I said, you? My voice went up like a teenager. I said, you? Bad men meet. They call
True
me
story.
boss.
I saw him on 125th Street. I didn't see him.
You seen them arms he got? You seen them arms he got?
I seen him. Yeah, brother.
Woo!
And I seen him. I said, you the brother that knocked out the horse. He said, yeah, I am. I was just confirming what my brother and my other knocked out a police horse. I can't remember the circumstance. He tells you.
We got to get him in here, man, or catch him and tape him in, because he ain't no spring chicken no more. Hank, when bad men meet. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear why when bad men meet, they call him boss. So you're on.
Brother Dennis.
Yes, sir.
Brother Dennis, hold on while we get everything together.
We on.
Okay. And the program that you're about to hear is The Communicators, coming to you from the Grand Houses in West Harlem, USA, 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. I'm your host, Brother Leroy, along with a crew of Brother Rick Young and Brother Doug. And we're very pleased to have with us a guest that we call on for insights into what's going on, economics, governmental, social, etc. This program, The Communicators, does not reflect the views, attitudes, whims, deeds, or any other proclivities of the resident association of the Grand Houses, nor does it reflect any ideas and proclivities of the management of this housing complex. However, the program does reflect the research done by the participants in the program. If you listen to this program live through its beginning and its end, then you are obligated to do your own research. So take notes and don't believe anything you hear. Now, that sounds strange, but don't believe anything you hear on this show. But you're obligated to do your research. Our guest online is Brother Dennis Speed of the Lyndon LaRouche Group, Political Action Committee, and the subject is current events. We want him to talk about assassinations and give us an overview of assassinations, the role of assassinations between governments. They could be covert, they could be overt, as we have just seen. Covert would be Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba, being killed at the hands of his own people, but the engineering of the assassination was from the West, the so-called Allied group. But anyway, Dennis, thank you for joining us, and please give us an overview before you talk about what we don't know but should know about the recent assassination in the Middle East, in Iraq.
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be here with you in a new year. We may not yet see a new policy, but we are certainly in a new time, a new decade. I think it's not unimportant to let people reflect on the arc of history that we have perhaps recently left behind, not necessarily for one that's better, but for one that's certainly different. The attack that you're referring to, the assassination of the Iranian military official who was also a top governmental official of that nation, which has been acknowledged to have been directed from the presidency of the United States, is really an inflection point. It's a jumping off point. It's going to change several things. That might be a change that improves elements of the strategic picture. It also might be a change that provokes an impending march towards thermonuclear war. Could be either one. But there's a basis to try to place oneself in if you will, the rowboat in the middle of the hurricane of foreign policy that we're actually engaged in. So the first thing I think it's important to remember for people that are listening is that the United States and the British intelligence forces during 1979 replaced the government of the Shah of Iran. This is a deep structure story, and I won't spend time on it now, except to say that let us remember that it was December 31st, 1979, exactly 40 years ago, that the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Soviet Union. Let's remember that today the United States is in Afghanistan, sometimes talking about leaving Afghanistan, but is in Afghanistan now. Let's also remember that Afghanistan has been known for over 1,000 years as the graveyard of armies. It has a lot to do with a combination of the terrain, the difficulty of fighting a war there,
and the people of the area. But the force that has tried to control politics, geopolitics as it's called, geographical politics, in this area for the past 250 years has been the so-called former British Empire. That is the British Empire that never closed down. In 2008, 12 years ago, there was a discussion that was held between Prince Andrew, you've recently heard about in headlines in conjunction with the case of Epstein. But Prince Andrew was talking to the American ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, which is a small country which is north of on the border of Afghanistan. And they were having a conversation, and the this was reported in the London Guardian in 2010. And the American ambassador was speaking about her view that it would be possible to stabilize this area of Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, and so on. And Prince Andrew said, you don't seem to understand that you Americans have been reintegrated into the Great Game. Now, the Great Game is a term that British imperialism used back in the 19th century, the 1800s, to explain their conflict, their ongoing conflict with Russia. And this conflict was fought at the roof of the world, as they called it, the top of the world. This referred to Afghanistan, northwest Pakistan, and then areas going into Tibet and other areas right there in the mountains. But that's what they call the roof of the world. And the concept was that what they wanted to do was control what's called Eurasia, the entire continent. The reason it's important to talk about this is if you really want to try to understand Iran, what's happening in Iran, it's not necessary to know four facts. First of all, the United States occupied Iran and ran Iranian intelligence from 1953 to 1979. Second of all, the United States then destabilized the Shah of Iran, and through a series of governments that then came in afterwards, Ayatollah Khomeini came to power in Iran. That was 40 years ago. The third fact to know is that immediately subsequent to that, a 8-year war was fought between 1980 and 1988, in which the United States was allied with Iraq against Iran and supplied Iraq with weapons of mass destruction, particularly in the early part of that war, meaning 1983-84. The fourth fact is that when that war ended with a technical Iraqi victory, and then Iraq decided to take as spoils of the war Kuwait, which used to be part of Iraq, and was allowed, apparently, to do so by the United States, that the United States then responded starting in 1989 with what was called Desert Shield, which began in 1990, and then Desert Storm on January 16th of 1991.
Dennis,
And so,
Dennis,
yes.
I need you to go back to the part where Iraq was made to think that it would be all right by the United States to retake Kuwait. Just go back to that and come forward. We had an interference.
Yeah, well, what happened there was that Kuwait had been a British protectorate and was originally,
back in the period of the 19th century, in the late 1800s through 1905, it was an outpost of the British Empire, which was intended to prevent the dominance of the Persian Gulf by Germany. Germany was trying to build a railroad from Berlin to Baghdad, famous railroad. And what they were trying to do is to break the relatively, not landlocked because they have a lot of rivers, but they wanted to try to have access into Asia. And they were using the development of a kind of transcontinental railroad to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Great Britain ran the sea. They ran the world through their navy. And what they were concerned to do was to prevent anybody from using these transcontinental railroads, which was a system that had been begun in the United States by Abraham Lincoln during 1861 when he first came into power in the United States. Then they built another one, Trans-Siberian, across Russia. And then the Germans picked up on this, and they had this idea of Berlin to Baghdad. And what this was these were ways to build within the interiors of continents. You could develop a massive economic and industrial powerhouse. And if you did this, then the power of British naval power would be circumvented because you have these internal developments. So Kuwait, what you know as Kuwait, was merely a kingdom, which was a protectorate, but it was carved out of Iraq by the British, who dominated Iraq, including bombing Iraq back in 1923 in the first aerial bombardment in history. So whenever we talk about Iraq, or we talk about Iran, or we're talking about these other areas, these are areas that British intelligence knows far more about than America could ever hope to know. They know literally every family in Afghanistan, every family in Iraq. They know the lineage of the families. They know their chieftains, their associations and so forth, familial associations. They study the entire area. So the Americans who came into Iraq in 1990-91, ostensibly because they're going to stop the dictator Saddam Hussein, with whom they were allied for 8 years against Iran. That group of people is never making foreign policy. Their entire policy is made in London. What we just saw happen in the attack that was done is a provocation which has to do with the following fact. On October 9th, Donald Trump announced that he was moving America out of Syria. In the course of his announcing this, he made a wisecrack about the American military-industrial complex wanting just to make money and to make wars in order to make money. And he said he wasn't interested in that. He wanted to make money other ways. He did wealth generation other ways. He also called the Iraq War the biggest strategic blunder in American history. Now, what that did is it set off alarm bells in what I will call the military-monetary complex, military, monetary, and intelligence complex. Now, this is not something that either President Trump nor any other American president, for that matter, is that conversant with. And it's important to understand it because where we are as of tonight is that Vladimir Putin, who was formerly head of KGB, and Xi Jinping of China, who has been pumping tens of billions of dollars into Pakistan to defuse the terrorism apparatus that ran between Afghanistan and northwest Pakistan. That Iran and Russia had just concluded military maneuvers with Iran. That is, China and Russia. China and Russia just included military maneuvers with Iran.
Right.
So they have recently, I'm talking about this about a week ago,
That's
they concluded
right.
these maneuvers.
Right.
So now you're dealing with is a new form of strategic alliance was coming into being. And what it had to do with is this. Putin has been doing stuff, including with Saudi Arabia and Israel, because of what they did in Syria to defuse the situation there. Trump had an arrangement with Putin to stand down in Syria because Putin made it clear to Trump, if you want to have terrorism eliminated there, we know how to do that. If you saw what we did in Chechnya, we know how to do that. So that was the arrangement that was made. And Trump bought into that arrangement because his thing is not making the money by making wars. He can do it another way. Some people know about, shall we say, certain a relationship that the Trump family has with Saudi Arabia, and also some people also in Israel. Okay, and so Trump and the people around Trump are not trying to push war. They see that as a negative, and they also think that's the way that their supporters in the heartland of the United States have been being penalized. So their whole thing is, listen, we're not pushing that because we're getting too much, not just flack. We know that the reason we can't put anything into the country domestically is because everything is going into these wars, and we don't want that. So we're turning that off, bringing people home, and we're going to prepare to make a set of deals, financial and economic deals with China and Russia. That's his thing. That's Trump's orientation. So what happened with the assassination? Well, let me put it like this, rather than try to answer that as though I know, because nobody exactly knows, precisely knows, except the people that instigated it. So what we know is this. With having done that, what is the problem is this is a government official. This is not some guy who was in something called ISIS or something called Al-Qaeda, neither of which actually exist. But you can't pawn it off as saying, well, it's one of the guys that was doing this and doing that. It's not what this is. And by doing this, you create a situation where whatever the back channel was that Russia was trying to work with Iran, with Trump, he blew it up. Now it's how can the Iranians negotiate anything with Trump? The purpose is what? What's going on? Even if Donald Trump is reelected, that's 4 more years. That's it. British policy and Anglo-American policy in this area, come on, that's been going on forever since at least the First World War, going back to what was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the British and the French divided this area into what now is called the Middle East. Created Lebanon, created Syria, created Saudi Arabia, created Israel. All that was created in 1917, starting from 1916 to 1919. And it was created exactly to have perpetual war among biblical nations where the religious thing is the primary. And then, of course, you have Islam in this as well from their standpoint. I'm not talking about Islam as an actual, but from their standpoint. So this is the issue. Remember, whenever we say Iraq, we said Babylon. When we said Iran, we said Persia. When you say Israel, you're saying Greater Israel. Okay. When you talk about Lebanon, that was a historical country, but it's a different area. When you talk about Syria, that's Assyria or Assyria, the Assyrian Empire. When you talk about Turkey, that's the Ottoman Empire. So what you really have here is not the map that people are looking at when they see the map and they look on there and they read these nations. That's not real. What there is a map of conflict, which is the actual political and cultural map. And since the British literally have studied every family there, they can instigate, they can navigate, and their issue is they think of Trump as being a danger to their imperial policy, and they figure once you get him out, they go back to business as normal because he's just kind of like a carbuncle, an aberration, an irritation that they want to try to remove. So the assassination was done for the purpose. Yes, on the one hand, Trump may have one idea of the purpose, but from the British standpoint, the higher purpose is create the maximum destabilization possible to enable the war machine to deepen, not decrease. And that is where we are.
So what I'm hearing is that what I'm hearing in your explanation or overview is that Trump was positioned into the action. That's what I'm hearing as an implication of what you're saying.
If there were a deal between Trump and Iran, that which would not happen between Trump and Iran, it would happen between Trump and Putin and Trump and Xi Jinping. And then this would involve Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. I invite people to look at a map and see why. If you take a look at a map and look at the names I just said, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, you'll see what this would mean. Because if you look at the border of Russia, this is where the great game was played for over 200 years. So that was where we were as of a week ago. The deal was happening. Trump had bought a certain silence initially from the Israelis because of the Tel Aviv to Jerusalem move of the capital. So you had that. Netanyahu was thought to be going down, which he did not. He was going to be defeated, which he was not. And so the concept was, okay, let's see if we can move ahead with a set of trade deals and negotiations, which is what the Chinese prefer. Chinese don't want to get involved in some big conflict with Trump, military or otherwise. They have a different view, different approach. So that's where you were. All of a sudden, bam, blew that out of the water. And now you're in a situation where people are now going to have to scramble to even come up with a way of keeping any kind of channel open. And the advantage for the British is very simple. They don't have the military capabilities of the United States, but they have the diplomatic capabilities that nobody else except the Russians have in the area. So what they do with this, what do they gain? They gain three things. One, strategic advising of the United States once again, which Trump had broken away from because of what the British did with him on the Steele dossier and the whole impeachment thing. That was all run by British intelligence against Trump, which he knows. They gained that. Now they're back in there. Two, there's a financial advantage they get. As you can see, if you look, won't go into details now, at the movement of capital, finance capital, over the course of the last week, and the way in which people are playing this thing for certain kinds of financial and monetary advantage. And the third advantage they get is that now, once again, the division between Russia and the United States and Russia and China and the United States, that is the division that you must ensure if you're going to actually keep playing this war game, where the advantage is that the profits are from war. And I just invite anybody who wants, just look up the top gun and arms manufacturing nations in the world, and you're going to see where Great Britain and the British imperial interests stand.
Okay, that move reminded me, the assassination of the general reminded me of something that I would have expected John Bolton to want to engineer. And Bolton is out. Yet that kind of move occurred anyway. How is that explained?
That's critical. I'm really glad you asked that question. See, the fact that Bolton was out demonstrates that Trump was uncomfortable with Bolton being there. Yet, exactly what Bolton wanted to do got done. All right, so what does this tell you? It tells you that it's a bad idea to believe whether you're president of the United States or you're, head of a corporation for that matter. It's a bad idea to believe that the intelligence you get and the evaluations that you get are coming from people who intend any good toward you. Check this out. Up until now, everything has been said. Well, actually, I won't get into that. That's a little speculative. Let me stay on what I know and stay on what I can tell you. The House of Lords in December of 2018 wrote a report, which you can get on the internet. I think it's called UK Policy in a Changing World Order. I believe that's the name of it. United Kingdom Policy in a Changing World Order. But it's House of Lords, and it's December 2018. And what it says in the sections 39, 40, 41 through about 43, it outlines that the British policy is not. They see a second. They do not want a second Trump administration. That's what they say in the document. Now, before saying that it's in a document that's what they mean, or that's what they actually mean, let me point out that they make it clear that the concept they have is that the problem of a Trump second term is not merely Donald Trump. The problem is that there is an American, independent, anti-British outlook, which is natural to the United States, which they think becomes expressed once Trump opens the window to that. And if that occurs, then there are policies, the so-called called the special relationship between America and Great Britain, that special relationship is suddenly not there. It's out the window. And they're concerned to maintain it. Except one point to also add. They don't care about the special relationship when it comes to China, where they have made every possible deal they can on China. And they've made those deals by talking to the Chinese about how they can't trust the Americans. See, so you're playing in a world, not playing in a world, we exist in a world in which the key factor that blows people's minds whenever I go through it, and Linda LaRouche did a lot of work on this in something that's also available on the internet. It's a 2-hour discussion called Storm Over Asia, which he did exactly 20 years ago, 1999, in which he forecasts not 9/11 as the direct event called 9/11, but he talks about the wars that are happening in Asia coming home to the United States. And he talks about a conflict in Russia, the Chechen conflict. He talks about conflicts in India, and he talks about conflicts in China. And he lays out, and that's probably the best place to take a look, how Zbigniew Brzezinski, now deceased, Zbigniew Brzezinski had begun the war in Afghanistan, had been the reason for the original war in Iraq, and that the policy of geopolitics that he represented would end up bringing the war home to the United States. So you can find that on the internet. It's called Storm Over Asia. It's a video. The first 8 minutes covers what I just talked about. So even if people only see the first 8 minutes, it's going to give you a clear idea of the idea of this area of the world, which is the cockpit of world war. There's what the issue is, and that's what's going on with Trump. Trump is a person that came in 4 years ago. He's not familiar with this territory. He knows some things about it because he's found out on the job. He may have had a view before he got there. He's got an erroneous view, in my view, with respect to particularly certain things involving Israel, like the moving of the capital. But regardless of what I think, what I can tell you is he does not have the idea that it is British policy that has dominated him, the United States, and the globe, particularly since the Second World War. and that is what is operational here, including the so-called terrorism. The center of terrorism in the world today is in London, not anywhere else.
You said just a few minutes ago that ISIS and Al-Qaeda aren't real. What do you? That's my words. Playing off what you said.
Brzezinski created this. Brzezinski created this starting the summer of 1979. It's a combination of things. He wasn't alone. Kissinger began the process, but Kissinger wasn't in charge of the Southwest Asia theater. Kissinger was working Southeast Asia. So when the war in Vietnam began to wind down in 75, Kissinger transferred the conflict into Cambodia. Some other things happened. They were concerned to do certain things also in terms of leaving Vietnam to create because the issue of Vietnam was the relationship to China. The relationship to China had begun because remember that the Vietnamese technically fought the Chinese for 1,000 years.
Right.
And the Vietnamese actually saw the American presence in Vietnam as more a derivation of that larger war with China than they saw it as being a conflict with the United States, which they actually had been allied with in the 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, when Kissinger when we got out, began in April of 75, of course, we got out in the ignominious running out of the retreat, April 30th in particular. When we got out, then Southeast Asia switched into Southwest Asia. So Brzezinski was given that bailiwick. He ran it through the Trilateral Commission, which he was the executive director of, the first executive director of it, and came in through the Carter administration. So the transition started in 73 when Brzezinski became head of Trilateral Commission. 75, we moved out of Vietnam. Then what happened is Brzezinski came in through Carter, 77, as National Security Council advisor. Then he began the process starting in 78, 79 into Pakistan. Pakistan, because it was going to be the staging ground for creating the terrorism through Afghanistan in the Northwest Corridor, which is called the so-called Khyber Pass of Pakistan. What happened was that they developed three things. They used the BCCI banking system, Bank for Credit and Commerce International. They assassinated the head of state, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, which was done through Kissinger. Who did that was he was put in jail and then he was executed in 79. And they brought in Zia-ul Haq, who was the military guy who they brought in to begin the process of creating the terrorist unit. Brzezinski gave a speech on the border of Afghanistan, wearing a head dress and all the whole thing, right on the border of the Afghanistan to the so-called fiercely independent Afghan freedom fighters. That's what they called them at the time, who would later be called Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, you name it. But that's what the thing actually was. That's what actually exists.
So it was a creation, it was a name given, a creation. The creation was set up to do a particular set of actions.
Yeah, financed through BCCI and through another economic deal called Al Yamama, which was run through England, but that was a little bit later. That came into being more in the 80s.
No.
But this was people in the Republican Party like Clark Clifford and people in the Democratic Party side, which is what Brzezinski represented. And that's what the Carter administration was doing. And then they got the script flipped on them in Iran. But the Iran thing was also Brzezinski. And Muslim Brotherhood, other things were being deployed through Brzezinski's operation. This was what Osama bin Laden was part of. The Bush family were the other managers for this thing, particularly Bush 41. And bin Laden was who remember was trained, Prince Bandar was trained at Sandhurst Military Academy. He was also trained as a pilot. He ran the military, that side of the Saudi intelligence apparatus for this. And this stuff the Israelis were in and out of. They were part of it as well. They were informed on it, and sometimes they collaborated with it, although they tended to keep a certain distance from it, but not because they didn't agree with it. It's because it was being run more centrally through Brzezinski's operation. But anyway, the point of all of this stuff is that whether it's a Trump, well, really, let's just take Trump because he's the one that's there. The issue is not whether or not Trump has responsibility. Of course he does. He's the president of the United States. Action was taken, and the action taken credit for it by the presidency of the United States. So you can't say that he's not involved. That's not true. But what you can say is that there is an intent here, and the intent goes way beyond anything that is being talked about in the short term. The intent is to blow up the circumstance between Russia, the United States, and China. Because if you put something together among those three nations can suppress any form of so-called terrorism.
Okay.
And the problem with doing that is if you do that, then it's bad for business.
It's bad for the military monetary complex. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
It's bad for that business.
Yeah. Anyone doesn't have anything. They don't have any real industry. All they've got is they've got this intelligence thing. They've got munitions, but they have no way of competing in the modern world. They have their old empire, their crazy kings and princes like Charles and Andrew and so on. But they do what the old Venetian state did when it became decadent during the period of the 16th century. At a certain point, Venice, like England, ran this massive navy, and they were all over the world, but they dealt in intelligence. They got to the point, in other words, they remember Venice had 16% of the population of Venice were prostitutes. But they used the prostitutes to gather intelligence.
Damn.
And then what they did is by a system of blackmail and also the fact that they knew things before other people knew them, because after all, there were no telegraphs or telephones and stuff like that. That's what they did. They maintained their power that way. Same thing with London. It does it, except now you use the so-called internet and social media and, real-time transactions, monetary transactions, and you run it that way. The United States has been corrupted into that, believes in that, or has become part of that. And what Trump simply represented was he represented an American reflex against that, because he has a whole base that has been completely, increasingly looted financially. He has a base that reacts to that. Yeah. So he's acting on behalf of the base.
Yeah, you got to make this clear for the listeners, because we have seen the base being his voting base, as being a rabid group of individuals, but in reality, give that piece again, they've been totally looted, you said. Here's simple statistic for people. If you look at what unionized auto workers, and you can look it up on the internet, you'll see this thing, just Google this idea. You look at what the salary is, the average salary of a unionized auto worker. Before 2007, the average auto worker's wage is between $28 to $38 an hour. It is as anybody was an auto worker. That same auto worker, unionized now, today wage between $16 and $20 an hour. Wow. Now that's skilled labor, okay? That's skilled labor. What about unskilled labor? So if you start looking out in the American heartland, and you start looking around also just at even like the once industrialized like Ohio, places like that, oh no, people are they're off the deck. They're off the deck. There's 100 million people, and we're not into black people here. We're just talking about typical white America, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Ill-housed, ill-clothed, and ill-fed, and in debt. So the country's been hollowed out.
People travel to China and they see cities which have 20 million people in them. Shanghai has 27 million people. They got high-speed rail. They got new construction. They don't have a lot of potholes in the street. Now they don't have the homeless begging on the streets. You come to America, those people come to America and see the difference. But Americans don't know. Except what has happened, in other words, is there is a need to get America out of this circumstance, and between the debt and the rest of it. And so Trump, remember from The Apprentice, he's Mr. Let's Make a Deal. So he does something that people like that he says, hey, I can make this deal, but if we got all this war stuff going on, I have no basis. I can't divert anything into these areas. Can't finance it. I don't have the power. Now, he does have the power, actually, because he could do what Roosevelt did. He's not thinking in that direction at the moment, or he might be prepared to think in that direction, but only if the American people, in some way, and this will be basically by pulling ourselves out of Afghanistan, pulling out of Iraq, just everybody pull us out of Syria, everybody, which I think a few people are starting to talk about now. That would then expose the real game, or portions of the real game. And that is, it remains to be seen whether he or anybody around him is prepared to go that far.
But once again, what's implied from this discussion, your overview, is that there are elements in the White House who would, there are elements, there are forces within the White House, whether it's deep state, no, I'm not going to say whether it's deep state, that these people have always been there. They represent a certain point of view. They could be on his team and represent a certain point of view, that certain point of view being akin to Bolton's point of view. And the way the New York Times explained it in an article in Saturday's paper is that Trump was dealing with a matter with his aides and whatnot, and then he got a tap on the shoulder and left that meeting. And he came back. This is the way it was written. He came back and resumed his meeting without saying where he had been. The next thing you know, this man had been assassinated. So there are elements there in and around him that would lead him away from what you've explained would be his intentions to negate that war thing. Before we conclude,
yes, but the Times is as guilty of this as everybody else is, because they're part of the. Here's how it works. It's not that complicated. I'm not saying you're making it complicated. I just want to make it very clear to people. But the fabric of this thing is this thing is straightforward. All these people are part of this thing. The American people, you see, have been taken out of this whole situation, partially because they self-abdicated decades ago. Those of us who were part of movements going back decades ago know something about that. The details and the specifics of it all may have faded from memory, but those of us who remember the early 70s remember a time when Americans thought that there was their responsibility to change the entire system. Mm-hmm. When they got off that stage, all of this other stuff got its own traction. And so today, I mean, you see that most clearly in the case of black people, and you can see it most clearly in the case of Obama. I think that Dr. Umar Johnson's analysis of Obama is accurate on that. Nobody else in American history has ever had a situation where you have a president that ostensibly looks like you, and then you get nothing. But it shows something. And what it shows is different than that, which is that people abdicated 40 years back. They walked off the battlefield 40 years back. And there's a price you pay when you do that. So that all of what we're talking about in terms of these other quote-unquote forces, appears very complex, but all it is that you have a circumstance in which their system has always been dying. It was dying from the time that Elijah Muhammad talked about it. It was dying from the time that Malcolm talked about it. It was dying from the time that Gil Scott-Heron talked about it. Okay, and what you've had is you've now reached a point where even the games they play don't end up in the effects that they believe that the games are intended to have.
Okay, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said in the last days, he said their wisdom would be turned backwards. He said what they did, in explaining that, one of the brothers said, his name is Brother Maceo Haziz. He said, I asked him, I said, what do you mean their wisdom would be turned backwards? And I'm relating what you just said about what they did yesterday. It doesn't have the same effect. He said, what they did yesterday, they will implement today, and it will not have the same effect. He said the same thing you said, but from a spiritual standpoint.
That's right.
Go ahead.
They will walk into the house, turn on the light, and the water will come on.
And that's the way it's happening. It's coming. It's coming. We laugh, but it come right out. It come right out of the fixtures and stuff. You say, "What the hell is going on?" We have questions before you leave. We have questions because we have a round table here at the Communicators, and we have Brother Doug and Brother Rick in part of the Communicator team. Brother Rick.
Hey, Dennis Speedy, I just wanted to ask you. You said earlier that even if, let's say, Donald wins, it'll be just 4 more years. Is it possible that he would do something like what Bloomberg did and even extend it to even another 4 more years? Is that possible?
Well, this would require an amendment to the Constitution, and he would be unlikely to get it precisely because technically he has been impeached by the House of Representatives. So his trying to move to do that would be, for him, shall we say, a highly imprudent move to try to do in an America where that has happened. Now, but you asked a different question, which is, could it be done? Yes, it could be proposed, but then you have the whole constitutional process that you have to do to get an amendment for it to happen. So that given that we still haven't had the trial, which has to, in the Senate around the impeachment, it would be unlikely that you'd even have time to put that in as a proposition and get it approved. It would be more likely that what would occur, just in terms of the time frame, unless you started now. Unless you started, let's say he got elected, and 2021 January, February, people started talking about that. In a circumstance where there wasn't a controversy around it prior to now, maybe. But in the circumstance we're talking about now, the likelihood would be that you wouldn't be able to do it, even if it were approved, until his presidency, which was afterwards.
Doug, you have a question?
Oh, okay, yeah. I just had one question. You were mentioning something about that, about Kuwait.
So I'm not hearing it entirely clearly. Could you just repeat?
Something about Kuwait, and I wanted to know why you think he sent those troops to Kuwait immediately.
Oh, you mean the thing that was just done?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, here's what's up. Here's what's going on. Remember the thing where he was supposed to pull out of Syria, and then all of a sudden we weren't pulling out of Syria, even though he had announced that we were pulling out of Syria? This was in October. Right. This happened. And he said, we're pulling everybody out. And then next thing you heard was, well, no, it's not really going to happen. And you would have people from the Pentagon who would be saying something different. Okay, now here's what I want to point out to everybody. See, you're dealing with a military establishment that is actually spending, on the books, $1 trillion. Okay, that's what they say their official budget is per year. Now they use terms like $700 billion, but then they put in additions, it's $1 trillion. But then there's a second element. That's what's on the books. It's about double that. So here's what the problem is. the extent of this, the size of this, the breadth of this is such that, in fact, he doesn't run this thing, because if you actually even if you tried to do it, you wouldn't be able to do it. So what you have is countervailing forces that are at work. Now, so what's the Kuwait thing? Well, Kuwait is basically not strategically that important, except for one thing: the Kuwaiti Investment Organization, which is basically like a large-scale operation, a large-scale monetary operation run mainly by Britain. So the troops are really there. You know, it's the old thing that the General Smedley Butler used to talk about way back. He wrote a book called "War is a Racket." It's written back in, like, I think, the 1920s, and he was sort of reflecting at that time on, you know, how the Marines were actually used in the aftermath of even before the First World War. And so that's what you got with that. That's what that's about. It's about guarding certain capabilities, and also it's true that it's got a certain strategic relationship to the Persian Gulf, but it's not really its military significance. It's its monetary significance.
Okay, what you're saying is that Kuwait is a pressure point because of that investment group there, and that
yes,
and that would be a target, whether it's structures like a Wall Street kind of thing over there in Kuwait or whatever, I don't know. But that's what you're saying. That's a pressure point. So they put the troops there to protect it from mob attacks or strategic attacks, etc. Missile, they would have
it's
batteries.
It's also symbolic.
Yeah.
It's what you just said, but it's also symbolic. It's a way of reasserting. Remember what I said. See, Kuwait actually was part of Iraq.
Right.
It was taken out of Iraq in 1905. So, but remember now that the Baghdad Parliament is discussing demanding that the United States remove itself from Iraq. Okay, so what happens is you move the troops to Kuwait in the event that you start to move out of Iraq.
Okay, so listen, in concluding this very interesting discussion, two things. Are you familiar with Steve Cohen, the expert on NYU? Have you heard him in the last few days or last couple of weeks?
Not the last 2 days. I heard him about 9 days ago.
Okay. What station was he on? Do you remember?
Whatever the one is that he does here in New York. I think every Tuesday he does some kind of a broadcast. Thanks.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, what should we be looking at now in concluding this discussion? What are things that we can look as either indicators of what you've just laid out or possible things that would say one thing or another?
Well, one thing to know is that we're building something. The Executive Intelligence Review magazine is building something up called the Emergency Alert Service. When I say we're building it up, we're already doing kind of a daily release, largely because of this situation. But we are also, besides the daily release, trying to both interview as well as report upon exactly people like Cohen and others, to make it available to people, even if it's only raw intelligence. Much of the time, we're not, of course, endorsing what they're saying, but we are making some of these points of view known. I think what people want to look for, well, here's what's needed. What's needed is a summit conference between Russia, China, and India right away. Russia, China, and the United States right away. India could also be in there because it involves Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. That's another area. And with respect to China, that's very important because you had a certain flare-up between China and India once China was going into Pakistan. But China was going into Pakistan just to chill out much of the terrorism issue, but also because they've got their Belt and Road Initiative and they want to build a series of railways as well as some other projects through these areas, which is the old Silk Road. Like Uzbekistan is part of the old Silk Road, Kyrgyzstan was part of it, Tajikistan, and Iran also was part of it. So they have a notion that Pakistan has to be in it. They were trying to deal with that Kashmir situation, which is kind of a border area between China, India, and Pakistan. And so India is getting upset about all this. So the things to look for, the thing to look at is the possibility that we may see, and I'm not predicting this. This is something that would become interesting. A set of negotiations, which are rather sober, involving Russia and India and China and the United States, the four powers. They're all continental powers, and they have the ability to access and intervene on behalf of and represent certain other nations, like North Korea, for example, or Syria, or Iran. Right? And so this is the level at which things need to happen. And I think otherwise, by reading what we're going to be putting out, people can get, like we said, the economic implications of all of this, which are going to be critical, and some of the broader strategic and cultural implications of all this.
And that particular meeting, that gathering, negotiations, whatever, would have a collateral effect on Iran?
The entire situation is that, because here's what the deal is. Look, Iran was run by the United States. Iran is on the Russian border, the old Soviet Union border. Iran does all Iran really wants is nuclear power. They don't really care about the bomb, except they care about the Israelis and their 300 bombs. So what they want to know here is, if are we going to be able to develop the capabilities from a nuclear standpoint that allow us, in terms of power generation and energy, to then take our oil, which is, they were the largest producer in the world for a long time, and have a transfer process of advanced industrialization that we run as a sovereign process. That's what this is all about. The same thing with North Korea, actually. So the lie here is that they're not trying to keep these countries behind, which they are. It is a form of technological apartheid. That's the truth. Now, Trump doesn't have a horse in that race, but various people in British intelligence and other American forces who are Malthusians for other reasons, they do. So the issue involved is that Russia and China believe that Iran should have the right to nuclear power, as they do for North Korea. Trump didn't have a horse in the damn race. So his basic point is, hey, let's just do this. I can see that. Let's negotiate this. And this is where the others step in. Because once you do that, you return to the old design, which was from Bhutto, from Gaddafi, from Indira Gandhi. They had this design that there was going to be a nuclear world, which was going to be Islamic and Hindu all along that area, which was going to supersede Israel's domination of the area by their military, by their bomb. That was the whole issue.
Okay.
And that is the problem. Right. And that's exactly what I happen to believe is possible. And precisely because this is a war-winning strategy, is a peace strategy, it's something that might be able to be negotiated. Clinton played around with this at Camp David with Arafat and Rabin, but nothing really happened. That's how Rabin got killed, because nothing happened. He made the agreement, but nothing happened. And so, yes, that meeting would have a direct effect on Iran. It would be a positive effect on Iran and the rest of the world.
Brother Dennis Speed of the Lyndon LaRouche Political Action Committee, we want to thank you very much for joining us on The Communicators, coming to you from the Grant Houses Community Radio Station in Harlem, USA. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, sir. Very good. Thank you. So long.
And
peace.
Peace. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to The Communicators. And as we said, don't believe anything you heard on this show. You took notes. You can begin to read up and do your own research. And until next time, I want to thank Brother Rick, Brother Doug, and company for joining us in this important interview to give us insight into current events. God bless you all. Peace.